And I wanted to talk to you about something really interesting, something that so many women in this group have asked about. I used to have a question on the application when you come in that says, what's the number one problem you're struggling with when it comes to overcoming pain and hurt in your life? And so many of you said, I just don't know how. I don't know what to do. So I wanted to talk about these emotional triggers, these things that come up, and really, we don't really understand them because they're buried so deep in our subconscious that when we get triggered, it just happens so quickly that we don't even know what's happening. And we wonder and we question and we don't know why we're showing up that way, but we are. So I want to go deep into this today because I think this is so important for us to all realize. When I realized this, it was huge for me because I started to see that I could have some semblance of control over some of the triggers that I was having and what was going on in my life that I really needed to work through. Because I'll tell you honestly, from myself, actually, before I even go into my story, let me ask you a question. Do you have subconscious beliefs that you know cause you to show up in certain ways? Do you have those things deep down that you know you haven't healed yet, and they're causing you to sometimes get angry or get frustrated or stressed? Do you get any of that stuff? Is this just me, or is there other, are you one of those people too who experiences those things? So I'd love for you to just answer in the comments. Do you know that your subconscious beliefs or things you have not healed yet might be triggering you even now in the present? Things that happened sometimes decades ago. Do you know that those things are helping you to show up in certain ways now? So just answer yes or no in the comments. So just a little bit about me. If you have not met me personally yet or via online personally, my name is ALANA and I am the creator of the Set Free Academy. And the Set Free Academy is a transformational Bible-based program. It's the only one of its kind that includes just phenomenal one-on-one support. And I walk you through how to get from being angry, stressed, depressed, all of those things going on inside you, all of those behaviors that show up now, how to go from there, that frustration of not knowing what to do about the pain, to completely overcoming it and healing and releasing it so that you can live fully into who God created you to be at the core. When you were born, before any of that stuff happened to you, before any of the trauma or the abuse or anything that came into your life happened to you, there was this core version of you. God created you perfectly, and then that was stolen in a sense. And I'm going to be really real with you. This happens to so many women. I, for one, had a lot of abuse in my past. I had a lot of trauma in my life. And it took me a while to get to a point where I could overcome it and truly believe that I was who God created me to be. It did not start that way. I struggled with depression, anxiety, suicide, so many things, or at least suicidal thoughts and attempts for so many years. And I finally figured out what it was that would help me overcome. And now I teach other women the same thing. So back to our topic. So emotional triggers. Let me tell you a bit of a story about my situation. I'm going to get really real with you today about my situation with my husband. When we got married, I was really excited about marrying him. I was in love with him. I felt like I'd hit the jackpot with him. He was this amazing guy, and I just couldn't wait to walk down the aisle. I thought I was in such a great place. I had a great group of friends. I had a great church. I was a strong Christian. I felt like I had a lot of things figured out in my life and that I'd healed a lot of the trauma from my past. So I walk down the aisle, I wake up the next morning, and I am in shock because I realize that I'm trapped and that I can't escape. And this is crazy, right? Because I just married the man of my dreams. So why was I feeling trapped? All of this stuff came up from when I was young. And what did I do? What do you think I did? I took it out on him. I made him wrong. I made him responsible. I looked to him to fill those holes that I had. And I didn't really understand it all because in truth, I thought everything was about him. I thought it was his fault. I thought the fact that he wasn't giving me what I needed was his fault. So I blamed him. I shamed him. I made him feel bad. You know, I was never abusive. I never put him down or anything like that, but I was not a nice person to be around. And even to this day, I say to him, why did you stick around? Because I mean, He's a committed man, which is amazing, but I was not in a good place. And the big part of it was that I was making it his fault because I had all of these wounds inside that I wasn't even aware of. So they're deep in my subconscious where I was triggered because I felt trapped, because I felt not enough, because I didn't like who I was. And I looked to my husband to fill that void inside me. So you can see the danger in that, right? It's not healthy to be putting all of that on another person, even if it's your spouse. We should not be looking to another person to fill those holes inside us, right? So the truth behind all of that was that I just wanted to be loved. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to know he wasn't going to leave. So I did this interesting combination of trying really hard to please him and make him happy and pushing him away. So I don't know if you've ever done this, but I was very hot and cold. Sometimes I would just want him so close to me, and other times I was so scared that I would push him away and put up walls and not believe that I was lovable. And I was just getting triggered just across the board. And I was always putting 100% of the responsibility on him. He needed to change. He needed to go to therapy. This was not my problem. I had dealt with all of my stuff, but the truth was I hadn't. And it took a long time for me to realize it because all of those things were buried deep in my subconscious, things that I did not want to admit to myself. I didn't want to see myself as wrong. I didn't want to face what was really going on inside me because it was too difficult. It was a lot easier to be right, to put it on him, to say that he needed to change, because then I could avoid all of that pain. But it didn't work. And I was very blessed that he stuck around, because I think in that situation, a lot of men would have probably chosen to walk away because they would have been so frustrated. But luckily, I got to a point finally where I realized that I got to change, that I had a lot of my own limiting beliefs and blocks inside. So I finally was ready. Now, you might be somewhere on the continuum. If you've had an experience like me, and I'm wondering, can you relate to this? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Are you feeling that this is something that you've done in your life too, where maybe it's hard to admit to yourself, but you've maybe pushed people away or gotten into a cycle of trying really hard to please them so that they would love you, and just looking outside of yourself for that gratification, that affirmation that you didn't have inside? Have you been there? Is this relatable for you? Because if it is, I want you to know that the subconscious is an interesting thing. We want to protect ourselves from pain. The subconscious is there, the ego is there to protect ourselves. So what happens when we're young and we experience trauma and abuse? We put up a wall, we protect ourselves. We don't want to go through that pain anymore. So it's very difficult to get to a point where we're open to actually exploring that area inside us. So you might be somewhere on the continuum. You might be in this place where you think, and this is okay, there's no judgment, because I've been there, trust me, where none of this is about you. This is about the other person. This is about the things they do. This is their fault. If they were to change and do these things, then your life would be better. That's what I thought about my husband, right? Or you might be in the middle where you go, okay, I know I have a bit of an issue somewhere deep down. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to try to get some help. So maybe you have been praying. Maybe you have gone to some kind of personal development group. Maybe you've been going to church and listening to sermons. Maybe you've been reading self-help books. I think I read almost every self-help book on the market when I was trying to figure out what was going on. So maybe you're in that place. Or maybe you are in this place like I finally got to, where you are just desperate and you have tried everything. You have tried therapy, meditation, prayer, self-help books, going for walks, spending time in nature, anything, right? We try so many things, right? I mean, I even tried things like damaging things like too much alcohol. I got into drugs for a while to cover the pain, right? So we all get into these things that we want to cover up the pain. So maybe you're at this place where you're like, I have tried everything and I am done. I just want the solution. If that's you, well, actually, wherever you're on the continuum, I can speak to you. But especially those people who are at the very end, who are just like, I am ready for the answers. So the first thing, what can you do? So here's the big question. What do you do when you have these emotional triggers? First of all, you get to understand that they're not actually completely about the other person. No, there are people in our lives who are mean, who are abusive, who we shouldn't have in our lives, who are just toxic. So of course, that's about them. And we get to dig deep and understand more about why we're allowing ourselves to be treated that way. When somebody is abusing us or putting us down or making us feel less than, why are we still in that relationship? Why are we allowing them to treat us that way? Now, my husband wasn't like that toward me, but I got in a relationship with a mentor who was very emotionally abusive and manipulative. And I allowed myself to be treated that way because I didn't feel good enough. I felt like she had the answers. She was going to give me the answers so that I could improve and be a better person. So I ended up being in a difficult situation, and it did a lot of damage to me because I wasn't strong enough to see that I shouldn't be in that relationship. So I don't know if that's you and you can relate. Have you been in relationships where they're just not healthy, but you don't know how to get out of them? You know you're not being treated in a way that makes you feel worthy, but you don't know how to get out. Now, there's a difference between those really toxic people that you shouldn't be in a relationship with and that space inside you that's A, allowing it, and B, maybe even looking at that other person as the problem, because it's not always them, but sometimes it is. Then the next thing is, and this is a big one, this took me a while, to take responsibility. So there in life, we become victims to things, and it's a real thing, right? We're victims to abuse. We're victims to people who manipulate us. We're victims to sometimes, society and what society dictates to us. So there are ways that we can be victims. And then there's something different. There's a victim mentality. So we can choose to be a victim. We can say, they did this to us. It's their fault. It's all about them. They have the problem. And we get to, at some point, take responsibility. So even in the relationship with that mentor that was very manipulative and emotionally and mentally abusive to me, I eventually got to the point where I couldn't put all the blame on her. She was not doing things that were healthy at all. But what was my responsibility in it? Well, I signed up for it. I was allowing myself to be treated that way. I wasn't walking away. I had holes inside me that she was filling, and I felt that I needed to stay in that relationship because I could, I could make it. I could make it better. I could make it work. I could, love her enough to see that she didn't need to be so insecure about certain things and that she just was really broken and I just wanted to help her. But it wasn't healthy. So I had to finally get to a point where I took responsibility for my part in it. And I realized that if I healed those wounds inside, I wouldn't allow myself to be treated that way anymore. So that was a huge realization. The next thing is to learn coping strategies. So when we get triggered, so what usually happens is somebody does something. So it could be your kids, it could be your spouse or a friend or something, right? Even something to do with COVID, right? Like a lot of times, at least in our city, we get these new rules like every week where they're telling us, okay, now you get to do this, now you get to do that. Now you get, well, it's not get to, it's have to, but they're imposing rules. And sometimes that can be a trigger because we don't have control. We can't do what we want. So we get to learn coping strategies so that we're not triggered all the time by outside forces. Learning these coping strategies will help you to not allow those outward circumstances to bother you as much. So I go back to this story a lot because I love it, about when Peter was Jesus called Peter to walk on the water. And so what did Peter do? Well, for the first little bit, he focused on Jesus, and then he was fine. He was walking on water. Then he looked around at the wind and the waves, right? He saw the storm around him and he got afraid, and then he began to sink. So this is very common with us. If we don't look at Jesus when we are in these situations, we will often look around at the circumstances, the storm, the wind and the waves, and we will start to sink. But when we look to Jesus, then we can walk on water, right? And it's a miracle. So he can do that in us. So one of the first steps to actually having these coping strategies is really aligning with God, understanding who you are in him, your identity, your worth, what he has you here for, because when you're living in your purpose, a lot of times these things around us won't affect us as much because we're so committed to why we're here. So coping strategies are huge, and it helps you to stop reacting. You will learn to respond. So there's a big difference between responding and reacting. When my daughter comes home, and she's 5, and she's got her own little personality, right? And it's usually her wanting her way. sometimes get a little bit triggered by her coming home and needing me when I'm in the middle of doing something else. And over the years, I've learned how to manage that much better because now I have those coping strategies so that her being her doesn't trigger me to show up a certain way, that I can take responsibility over how I show up and say, I'm not going to react to what she's doing, her tantrum or her, wanting to get her way. I can respond in a way that comes from responsible. So that was huge. Also, when you heal that area inside you, you can learn these coping mechanisms and they're so helpful when you're in the moment. But really, it comes down to healing those areas inside you that are still broken and cause you to feel not good enough, feel not lovable, feel frustrated and agitated. All of those fears deep down that have not been fully dealt with, those fears that keep you protecting yourself or possibly in a place of even people pleasing and wanting to show up a certain way so that people will like you. And when they don't, you get triggered. So how do you heal those areas, right? Because loving yourself is crucial to be able to love other people. Second commandment, which you can find in Mark 12, I believe, is one of the places it's listed, is love your neighbor as yourself. So a lot of times we focus on loving our neighbor, but when we love our neighbor as ourselves, we have a healthy love for us, which in turn means that we can love other people better because it is very hard to give something to someone else that you don't have. How can you give that love, that agape love to someone if you don't actually have it inside, right? And we might think we love ourselves in some ways, but if you're showing up with a lot of triggers and things are bothering you a lot and you're living in a space of being agitated, frustrated, down, stressed, filled with anxiety a lot of the time, and maybe even those thoughts going on in your head where you're saying, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, why would people want to hang out with me? Any of those thoughts, right? You know what they are. I've had all of them. And you know that there's a trigger. You know there's something deeper. So it's basically about wanting to face it and heal those areas inside your subconscious that have been programmed probably from a very young age to believe the things you believe. So I think I just want to sort of encourage you at the moment to look at how you want to spend your energy, how you want to spend your time. Do you want to work really hard to show up a certain way? Do you want to work really hard to, overcome all of this on your own? Because you absolutely can. And God can heal you in an instant. It's absolutely possible. So I know I have had miracle healings in my life, which has been amazing. And there's also this area inside which it really helps to have someone to walk alongside you, which is exactly what I do. So if you know that this is an area in your life that you struggle with, and if it is, I get it. Like I said, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to feel not enough, to feel like you don't even know if you have the relationship with God you want to have. You don't know that you're raising your kids the way you want to raise them and being a good example and influence. This was a big thing for me. When I saw how I was showing up with my daughter, I went, is this how I want to be? Is this how I want to teach her? Because it was not healthy, right? And this was a while ago. I've learned over the last probably 3 or 4 years to really stand in my place of responsibility around it and not get triggered. But first few years of her life was tough. So if you know you're a woman who, when I talked about that spectrum, you've tried everything and you're at the end, you are ready for change and transformation, and you know that you are 100% committed to that, then I invite you to book a call with me. I have a one-on-one call that I do with women who are ready. It's called a Set Free Strategy session. And in the session, we basically go through ways to start to uncover what's going on in your subconscious, those deep beliefs that are not serving you, how you can then release them, how you can overcome those old thought patterns that aren't serving you anymore, so you can really align with God's plan and his vision for you, which is living in freedom, living in abundant joy and peace, and not being held back by those old beliefs that have been hanging around for way too long. So I believe that God wants to heal you of all of these things. And I am praying for that. I am praying that he comes down and just heals you. And if you look in the Bible with the stories of people who were healed that way, there was an element of surrender in all of them. all of them said, you know what, God, I'm ready. I surrender. So if you are ready to surrender, if you're 100% committed to the process of overcoming, then I am here for you. And I have a program that is probably perfectly designed for someone like you, for Christian women who have been in pain and just want to live in that space of overcoming. You're already an overcomer, but do you believe it? Do you live in that space of agreement to who God says you are, to his promises, to his protection and his provision for you? Or are you living in a space of trying to control, trying to protect, in a space of fear? And I look forward to talking to you soon. If you have any questions about this live and you want to pop them in the comments, I'll be looking over the next few days and answering any questions that pop up. So it has been lovely spending time with you today, and I look forward to being in touch with you soon. Have a great day. Bye. Thank you for watching. If you connected with this content and it helped you in some way, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, check the description below for special gifts just for you. See you in the next video.